Once she became a pretty widow, Su Yan lifted her sleeves to earn money in return for the rough man who saved her. From a dilapidated thatched cottage to the only brick and tile house in the village, with several acres of fertile land, Su Yan wanted to be a carefree and beautiful widow as soon as the life-saving kindness had been repaid. As soon as he stepped out of the house with his front foot, the rough man carried him into the house with his back foot and said in a low voice, "Don't leave, I'll marry you." Su Yan was dumbfounded and blurted out, "I won't make a promise with my own body." The rough man stared at her and said, "No need, I promise you with my life." It's outrageous. The wandering prince wants to marry a widow as his consort. The whole capital says that the pretty widow was transformed by a fox seductive fairy, specifically seducing the prince. Su Yan was really wronged. It wasn't she who seduced him, it was that rough prince who seduced her, and now she still has a baby in her belly. Keywords of the novel. After marrying a rough man, I carried my baby without a pop-up window. After marrying a rough man, I carried my baby with me. Download the complete text. After marrying a rough man, I carried my baby with me. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Becoming a Pretty Widow. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Becoming a Pretty Widow, Kill This Ignorant Widow. That's right, let her seduce the man. Cheap hooves. Several women fought fiercely at the stunning widow who had fainted under them, and finally threw her to the side before setting fire to the room behind her. This kind of calamity should not stay in our village. Shameless sluts, they just hook up with men. Shameless. I'll teach you a lesson for your mother. The other onlookers felt sorry for the widow, but no one stopped them. After all, no one wants to be looked down upon by others just because of a widow, who is in front of everyone. If there were anyone in the widow's family, they wouldn't be so arrogant. It's also unfortunate that the widow's husband's family has gradually died. As the wooden pieces of the house were about to fall and hit the widow on the ground, no one shook her. The women were eager to smash her to death. At this moment, a tall man in the crowd strode over and bent down to pick up the widow on the ground. The widowed woman, who had been beaten up in a daze, opened her eyes slightly, but there was only a dark shadow in her eyes, making it difficult to see who this person was. Soon, she fainted again. Just a few steps away, the burning beam of the house fell onto the spot just now. If it were to be smashed heavily, it would definitely not die or be disabled. When the women saw that the widow had not died, they were unhappy. If she had died, their own men would not have been visiting outside every day. Suddenly, he cursed at him with all sorts of words, "You disaster star, what are you doing with her? Do you still want her to be your daughter? Law. But coincidentally, a shameless widow, a disaster star who will kill the whole family. Join in a pair of disasters." The man's footsteps paused slightly, his eyes lowered, and he quickly lifted them. He took a big step and carried the widow towards his home. There was a constant stream of unpleasant curses from behind. "Look, that's all I'm thinking about. These two goods will eventually rot together." Exactly, it killed this shameless and stinky widow. They dare not attack the man, only dare to thrust their backs and curse. After all, Qin'an is a skilled hunter in the village, and a few years ago, they even killed a big bug. The Qin family a rudimentary wooden courtyard. There was no bed at home, only a grass mat. Qin'an placed the woman on it and sniffed her breath, still feeling a faint breath. At this moment, the woman suddenly opened her eyes and met the handsome face of the stranger, whose eyebrows and eyes were somewhat difficult to provoke. She was instinctively startled and instinctively thought it was some bad person. She kicked him and warned, "What do you want to do?" She got up and stepped back. She looked around, still in an unfamiliar environment, her heart pounded. This morning, as soon as she opened her eyes, she arrived at Su Yan's body. Before she could figure out what was going on, a group of women in cloth clothes pulled at her and hit her. With a slap, I was stunned and had no resistance afterwards. Watching them burn down the house, they eventually fainted. Qin'an's thigh was kicked straight, but it didn't hurt much for him, so he took 2 steps back. "Since you're awake, then you can leave," he said in a somewhat indifferent and distant voice. He is not a meddler, saving her is just a pity for her. Just like him. Upon hearing this, Su-Yan's thoughts converged and she realized that this person was the man who saved her at the time. She looked up at him, and the man had thick and shaped eyebrows, deep eyes, a high and straight nose, thin lips, and some dry skin. The wheat-colored skin has peeled off a bit, as if it was caused by prolonged exposure to the sun. Wearing a pudding cloth jacket, with broad shoulders, he looks very sturdy. He is clearly a rough farmer, but much more handsome than an average farmer. Qin'an met her gaze and furrowed his brow in disgust. He immediately spoke out and drove her out. "The door is over there." After saying this, he left her alone and took out an arrow to grind on the graphite. Su-Yan glanced outside the door and looked out in her direction, far away in the mountains and forests, unable to see at a glance. She suddenly found herself in a difficult situation, probably in a mountain village. Looking at the man grinding arrows, she pretended to be pitiful and disgusted. "Big brother, can you stay here for a while? I'll leave as soon as I have money in my hand. My yard is gone, and I have no place to go. Those people who go out will bully me." She was originally a widow and married a sickly young man to celebrate with her husband. However, the sickly young man did not survive and died on the 3rd day of their marriage. "My mother-in-law and father-in-law only have one son, who is depressed and unhappy. They died one after another in less than a year. Originally, leaving the yard could provide shelter from wind and rain, and even an acre of land could support herself. However, Su-Yan was too beautiful, and her uniform couldn't conceal her curvaceous figure. Although Anan lived a separate life, she couldn't control those 3-legged toads sneaking at her door and constantly harassing her. Being discovered, not only did no one help her, but also accused her of being restless. Over time, the rumors became more and more excessive, and the original person couldn't bear this kind of vulgar language, so she crashed into a wall and committed suicide, and then she became the original person. Now that the yard has burned down, she is unfamiliar with the place and a widow. It's quite difficult for her to have a place to live. Even if she is capable, she can still handle the situation clearly. In such a lowly dynasty, not to mention making money when going out, it would be good if she could save her life. Qin'an pursed his lips as if unwilling and said indifferently, "I don't have anything to eat here." Su-Yan quickly waved her hand and said, "I'll go find something to eat on my own. You don't have to worry about what I eat. Just give me a place to sleep." In my original memory, life was not easy for this person. At the age of 7 or 8, my parents and other relatives passed away. In order to bury them, I borrowed a lot of silver from unscrupulous people. Every now and then, someone comes to his house to grab things to pay off his debts, and life is quite difficult. So even though he is skilled in hunting, he cannot eat enough. Seeing the man remain silent, she gritted her teeth and knelt on the ground, pretending to cry softly, "Big brother, please take me in. I will definitely repay you in the future." Qin'an, who had been grinding his arrows, finally looked at her and frowned, as if saying how to cause trouble. After all, he is in dire straits. Seeing the man remain silent, Su-Yan glanced at him and lowered her head to choke again, "Big brother, please. I can be your ox or horse, as long as I have a place to live. Big brother, you are a kind-hearted man. I know you've been troubled, but I have nowhere else to go. My husband's family is all dead, and my parents don't want me." Qin'an should have refused, but upon hearing this, he fell silent for a moment and pointed to the room next to him, saying coldly, "There's a room next to it." Then he stood up with a bow and arrow and went out. As the figure of the man crossed the gate, his head slightly bent. Quickly, he stopped and turned to face the woman's red eyes, small and helpless. He pursed his lips and added a few words with a soft heart, saying in a low voice, "Don't be afraid, they dare not come in. New book opening, great support. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Married a widow as a wife. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Married a widow as a wife. Seeing the man strode away, Su Yan breathed a sigh of relief. At this moment, the pain on her body hit, and she couldn't help but hiss. What kind of luck is this? She worked alone in a big city for over a decade, started a company, and finally relaxed herself, only to fall into the sea. Now we have to start over again. Oh, forget it, being able to live is already good. She looked around and saw that the dilapidated thatched cottage was a bit messy. If she hadn't known it was inhabited by humans, she would have thought it was inhabited by cows. She was given a place to live, and she didn't take advantage of him. After sitting for a while, she took the broom at the door and cleaned it. It took 2 to 3/4 of an hour to clean up, and she sat on the threshold, taking a few breaths. Looking at the clean thatched cottage, she felt a little relieved that she was not a wealthy young lady who didn't touch the sunshine and spring water. Otherwise, come to this haunted place and find a place to hang yourself. At this moment, Su Yan was so hungry that her stomach was growling. She touched her stomach and stood up. In her memory, there was still an acre of land where many vegetables were planted. Speaking of which, I am also a capable person, but without anyone to support me, coupled with my appearance, it has caused a lot of trouble. Poor. After going out, many women saw her, pointing and cursing. If the women here could bear it, it would be strange. There's still face to face. If she had jumped into the river long ago, she would have died. That's not it. It's really disgusting. We seduced here and there, and the whole village was harmed. Su Yan is too lazy to talk to them, mainly because she is currently weak and unable to win a fight. She never does anything foolish. The land used to be a good piece of land in the village, and the family of Su Yan's deceased husband was relatively wealthy. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to afford to marry a beautiful woman like Su Yan. However, it was just a lack of happiness and suffering, which also caused Su Yan great harm. It's July now, and the weather is a bit hot. The vegetables in the vegetable field are all sun-dried. There are chili peppers and some vegetables, some of which she hasn't seen before, and she can't recognize them either. She picked a handful of chili peppers and a few greens, enough for the two of them to eat, so she walked back. She looked at the village as she walked, built by the river, and the way out of the village had to be by boat. If she didn't know how to row and still couldn't get out, it would have dispelled her desire to go out. The village is probably not wealthy, and there are only 2 brick and tile houses at a glance. At this moment, my hand suddenly hurt and all the dishes fell to the ground. The next moment, the woman followed the sound of a loudspeaker and said, "It's all your fault, you slut, for keeping my family from going home all day. Why don't you go die?" She began to get started. After being hit, Su Yan immediately dodged, feeling a bit angry. These people knew they were bullying the widow who was originally there. What's wrong with the widow? She didn't kill or set fire to anyone. She said coldly, "It's none of my business. It's not that I won't let him go home. Give it a try again, don't blame me for being ruthless. I'm not afraid of death alone. What about you? Afraid of death? Barefoot is not afraid of wearing shoes. The more these people are afraid, the more they bully her. If they were a little harder at once, they would know they were afraid." A woman who had never seen such a fierce and crying widow was immediately stunned and didn't speak for a moment. She quickly reacted and rushed forward, wanting to slap her twice. Su Yanmao kicked her with all his might, then picked up a stone on the ground and pointed at the woman fiercely, saying, "Are you going to fight?" The woman stumbled and let out a "ouch." Seeing her stone, she was immediately afraid to cover her head. "What do you want to do?" "Killing, killing." Su Yan glanced at her and then picked up the vegetables on the ground. Finally, she stepped on the vegetable basket that the woman had dropped on the ground with both feet, and only then did she turn around and leave. The onlookers were all dumbfounded. Widow Su had always been gentle, whispering softly. How could she have become so fierce? Shouldn't be crazy. Su Yan returned to the thatched cottage, and there was nothing else in the kitchen except for a little salt. She licked her tongue and realized that it was a miracle that she could still live after so many years. Being so sturdy is also a miracle. She sighed for a while, then picked up a fire switch and started the fire. It wasn't difficult for her to start a fire. She was a child who walked out of the mountains. Her parents passed away early, and this older sister supported the burden of the 5 younger siblings in the family. Thinking of this, she felt a little grateful that her younger siblings had all grown up, otherwise she would have died with a sense of unease. When the fire finally rose, she quickly scooped water to wash the pot, then washed and chopped the vegetables, chopped the chili peppers, and waited for the dishes to taste a bit. Without oil, only water can be boiled well, mixed and stirred. She hesitated for a moment, but still used a little salt, hoping that the man wouldn't beat anyone. After cooking, she picked up a bowl and chopsticks, left half for Qin'an, and then she ate it in large bites. The taste is not delicious, but she doesn't choose either. She has lived even poorer days than this. After finishing her meal, she began to think about how to survive here. There was an acre of land that couldn't starve to death, but there was no place to live. Living in the Qin'an family is not a long-term solution. After all, it's not personal. He wants to drive her out, so he drives her out. Those women burned down her yard, thinking she didn't dare report to the authorities. When she thought of this, she planned to first resolve the matter of the residents, naturally going to the village chief to talk. Just as I was about to leave, the door was suddenly kicked open from outside. The loud noise startled her, and when she looked from the kitchen, she saw 4 or 5 people coming in with sticks. At first glance, it appears that the debtor has arrived. She was about to hide when those few people saw her, and her heart skipped a beat. What kind of bad luck constitution is she having? The bearded man, who was the leader, saw her and his eyes lit up. He cursed and said, "Oh, I haven't seen you for a few days, so I married a widow from the village. Look at this butt, how hard it is. Who wouldn't know that there was a pretty widow in Shuixiang town, with her chest and buttocks like the soul of a seductive man?" He paused for a moment, became lecherous, and said lewdly, "Exactly. If you don't have the money, you can offset it with her. Although you're not a beginner, you must be in bed with this attractive appearance. If it really can't be sold, I'll leave it for myself to enjoy. It's also worth buying such a woman for 6 taels of silver." Seeing them coming over, Su Yan quickly grabbed the chopping knife from the kitchen door and explained calmly, "I'm not his wife, I'm just temporarily staying here." A few men burst out laughing in disbelief, as if hearing some funny joke. The bearded man walked over lewdly. "Since it's not the case, it would be even better. Sleep with me and I'll give you 10 won. I'm afraid your sickly husband may not have satisfied you." Before he could finish speaking, he saw the beautiful widow come over with a knife, and her posture didn't seem playful. He quickly took a few steps back. Su Yan knew these people were afraid of death. As long as they were willing to go out freely, it wouldn't be so easy for these people to bully her. Several men suddenly withdrew from the thatched cottage. After all, no one wanted to die. The man with a bearded face spat saliva and exclaimed in disbelief, "Damn it, you're really here. This is the first time I've seen such a successful widow. Don't let me catch you, otherwise I'll have to deal with you well." There were already many people watching the excitement at the door, but no one came up to cause a scene, and Su Yan didn't expect them to help. These are all a group of indifferent and selfish people. Asking for help from these people will only make them laugh. She clenched her firewood knife and said, "As long as you step into this courtyard again, I'll come for real. If caught by these people, she really won't have a good life. Moreover, the Qin family is so poor. If they are swept up again, the courtyard may collapse." She finally found a place to settle down and definitely couldn't let them in again. At this moment, a tall and sturdy figure walked in from the crowd. He walked to the door with a bow and arrow, blocking the way and saying, "I'll give you some money when I change it tomorrow." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. I will not marry you. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. I will not marry you. No, we have to give it today. Otherwise, you won't want this thatched cottage either, said the tall man in grey cloth in a wicked voice. Qin'an seemed not afraid either. He was probably used to this kind of scene and stepped aside. Not now, if you want to dismantle it, then dismantle it. After speaking, he looked at Su Yan and gestured for her to leave quickly. Su Yan doesn't mean she doesn't want to leave, but rather where she can go. Even if she wants to leave, she must first figure out where this is. Now when I ask 3 questions, I don't know. Going out is just seeking death. Although Qin and Han looked scary, they should have had a good heart to save her. She thought for a moment and could only take a gamble. She gritted her teeth and said to the person at the door, "I have 1 acre of land, and I will give it to you when I sell it tomorrow." This statement seemed to confirm that Su Yan had an affair with Qin'an. The onlookers were even more talkative and lively for a moment. "Oh, I just said these two have an affair and are raising a man with their husband's belongings. It's really shameless. Look at that widow's belly, it's obvious she's pregnant. No wonder Qin'an wants to save her. I've been behaving recklessly for a long time, bah. I feel nauseous when I see it, so I should tie it up and burn it. I don't know how many people have gone through with this widow Su. Surprisingly, there are still people picking up junk." Su Yan really experienced the power of these long-tongued women. Saying this is even more outrageous than writing a novel. But this is not the time to curse at them either. She looked at the group of men and said, "I'll give it to you tomorrow. If I don't have it now, but you don't want to come in either." She then picked up her machete. Everyone was startled and stood further away, afraid that she might go crazy. Qin'an regained his composure, frowned, and immediately spoke out, "It's okay with us. You don't need to help me. I'll pay some back tomorrow." The last sentence was clearly spoken to the person asking for the silver. The man with a beard also knows that this is nothing. Qin'an is not as easy to bully as he was when he was a child. If he really passes, no one can win him over. He pointed at Su Yan and said harshly, "Okay, if you don't pay back, I'll tie you up inside the brothel. Let's go." He then stared at her round buttocks. "Stinky women, don't fall into my hands, otherwise I will definitely take good care of her." After they left, Qin'an furrowed his brows and looked at Su Yan with a somewhat indifferent expression, saying, "I don't want you to care about my affairs. I just saved you easily and don't need you to do anything. No matter how you handle it or not, I am still alive. Thank you." Su Yan paused for a moment, afraid that he wouldn't agree, and then hurriedly said, "I won't help you repay it in vain. If you make any silver money in the future, please repay me." She will definitely not help Qin'an in vain. Solving his temporary difficulties is also to solve her own problems. She is not so kind. Seeing him speechless, she glanced at him and said, "I know you make a lot of money from hunting. You should have paid it off long ago. They keep raising money, and you can't pay it off for a lifetime like this. As long as you guarantee that I won't starve to death at your house during this period, I will help work together." She immediately said, "Now they hold a grudge against me. If they don't pay me back, they will definitely tie me up in a brothel and sell me." She then looked at him seriously. Everything has been said, those scoundrels must have set their sights on her. Qin'an put down his bow and arrow, picked up the lock on the ground, fell silent for a moment, and agreed, "I'll give you back within 2 months, and I'll give you an extra 1 or 2 silver. I'll give you the property deed." Upon hearing what he said, Su Yan knew he was a good person. She breathed a sigh of relief and quickly said, "Big brother, I believe you, you don't need to give me the house deed. Let's go and retrieve all the vegetables from the field later." If we can't finish them, we'll sun-dry them and leave them. Qin'an's gaze lingered on her face for a moment. This was the first time he could see what she looked like. In the past, she always lowered her head, bent over, and walked hurriedly, like a startled bird. The skin is rare and fair, with slightly flushed cheeks and slightly raised eyes, resembling the eyes of a fox. It's because of these eyes that she doesn't look like a lady from a good family. The man's inquisitive gaze naturally caught Su Yan's eye, but she was not afraid either. Who could have imagined that she was a soul from somewhere else? Suddenly she remembered something. By the way, Brother Qin, I cooked vegetables in the kitchen and left some for you, using a little bit of your salt. After speaking, I glanced at him and breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that he was not angry. Upon hearing Qin de Ji's 3 words, Qin'an was stunned for a moment, with a hint of abnormality in his eyes. He quickly returned to normal. He lowered his head and secured the lock. As soon as he entered the house, he saw a clean yard, and for a moment he had the illusion of home. Suddenly, his footsteps stopped for a moment. It's been a long time since he cleaned up like this, and there's no need to clean up. Someone will come and make a scene in a few days. Seeing him standing still, Su Yan thought he was too embarrassed to eat, so she went to the kitchen and brought it to him. With a hint of flattery, she said, "Qin, here you are." She definitely wants to please him, and if there's anything she can do, someone will help. Qin'an regained his senses and looked at her, seemingly guessing her intentions. He pursed his lips and said, "I won't marry you." I probably mistakenly thought she was looking for her husband's house. After all, widows have a difficult life. Su Yan was stunned for a moment, then realized that she could hold back the urge to twitch at the corner of her mouth and said she could do anything she wanted, not just men. She explained seriously, "Brother Qin, don't worry, I didn't mean that. I'll treat you as my big brother. Thank you for saving me and taking me in. If you don't mind, I'll treat you like your sister. I work very efficiently." Qin'an didn't say a word, took the bowl and ate 2 chopsticks before saying, "Don't be too close to me, I can crush people." He paused for a moment, his expression softened a bit, "Just call me if you have something to do." He spoke coldly, as if he also believed in himself as a self-defeating person. Su Yan didn't believe this kind of nonsense. If it were really to suppress people, the people in this village would have died long ago. She said seriously, "Don't listen to their nonsense. If you want to suppress people, all the people in this village will have died. Your parents' death has nothing to do with you, they just fell ill and passed away." It was probably the first time I heard someone say that his parents' death had nothing to do with him, and Qin'an looked at her with a strange expression. He didn't say anything, just his slightly lowered eyebrows and eyes exposed his current emotions. After finishing his meal, he went to wash the dishes and then went back to the room to take out the house deed for Su Yan, who was pulling grass. "You can give it to me after you pay it off," he said. "Speaking of which, the house deed is more valuable than 6 taels of silver. Although the Qin family's house is dilapidated, the place is quite spacious. If Qin'an had sold this house, he would have paid off his debts long ago, but this is the house left by his father. He hasn't sold it yet, that's why those unscrupulous people keep increasing their money. Otherwise, this courtyard cannot be preserved." Su Yan hesitated for a moment, wiped her hand, and then reached out to take it and put it away. "Brother Qin, if you're not worried, I'll take it." "I'll give it back to you then," she said. Thank you to the readers who voted for the recommendation. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Widows Just Want Too Much Fame. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Widows Just Want Too Much Fame. Qin'an was not worried that she could trick him. Bai let out a and then walked towards the door, but stopped at the moment when he stepped out. He tilted his head slightly, and the woman in front of him began to squat and pull at the weeds in the yard, already pulling at a piece. He pursed his lips and explained in a low voice, "I'll go up the mountain to get the prey. You go to the field first, and I'll carry it later." He didn't ask where the land was. The land in the village was very concentrated, and Su Yan's Xiangong's family was a good land, naturally located in the village. "Okay, Brother Qin, be careful when you go up the mountain," Su Yan said with a self-proclaimed friendly smile. "She looks too pretty, and when she smiles, it's as bright and dazzling as a summer lotus." As a man, Qin'an instinctively glanced at her again, and soon realized it. He turned around and walked away, with a slightly faster pace. After tugging for a while, Su Yan took the only basket in the room and locked the door while carrying it. In fact, there was no need to lock it, except for a big pot that was valuable and had nothing else to do. This is to be poor and rest assured. However, some people may not even let go of the pot. Before going to the field, she visited the village chief's house, and the village chief's wife was one of the people who hit her. Otherwise, others wouldn't have the courage to come and cause trouble directly at her house. In addition, he was afraid to speak due to his original appearance, so it became even more severe. To deal with these people, you need to be tough and be willing to go out. Widows and widows, bad is bad, too much emphasis is placed on reputation. She stood at the door and shouted, "You burned my house and intentionally killed someone. If you don't compensate for my house, I will go to the yamen to sue you. When the time comes, it seems that you, the village chief, won't be able to handle it properly." As soon as the village chief heard about the yamen, he ran out, and the village chief's wife also ran out, pointing at her and cursing, "Didn't you seduce people first? You dare to come to my house and see if I don't kill you. You have to provide evidence. I am innocent. Without evidence, you are slandering. You burned my yard as evidence. Also, village chief, what did you come to my doorstep in the middle of the night to do to me?" Su Yan doesn't want fame. Since these people don't want face anymore, why does she want face? If a widow wants face, she will be bullied. Besides, she's not getting married again. What are you afraid of? Just survive. Thinking of this, she said again, "I'll go to the yamen tomorrow and tell the adults everything you've done, and see how you treat a widow. Burn down my yard casually, and even come in to attack me. The government dare not abuse execution. Are you even more powerful than the government?" As soon as she heard the last sentence, the village chief's face changed and he immediately scolded her, saying with a black face, "What are you talking nonsense about? I'm not talking nonsense. You know in your heart that if you don't compensate for my house, I'll report it to the yamen. If you have the ability to break my leg or kill me." Su Yan didn't tell them much, and after finishing speaking, she left with a backpack on her back. In fact, she was afraid that the village chief and others would attack her, so she spoke out in public. On the contrary, he had to weigh it up. After all, there were many people in the village with mixed voices. If she died, it would be impossible for the village chief to escape. The face of the village chief's wife behind her was twisted with anger. She reached out to grab the village chief and said in a sharp voice, "You said you didn't go, see if I won't catch you." The village chief let out a painful ouch and became angry with embarrassment, saying, "Let go. You're such a shrew. Believe it or not, I'll take you off." "Show. You actually want to show me? I have no conscience. Woo-woo." The village is so big, and Su Yan's words have also been heard by other families. They immediately felt a little scared, and reporting to the government would result in punishment. In no time, several houses in the village began to dance like chickens and dogs, and the sound of cursing continued for a long time. Su Yan had already reached the ground by now, pulled out the vegetables next to her, put them in the basket, and soon it was full. She just squatted down and wanted to carry them back first. Suddenly, his gaze dimmed, and the man's voice was a bit deep, as usual without any ups and downs. "Let me do it," he said. She looked up and met her tough face with a smile, saying, "Thank you, Brother Qin." Her tone was too friendly. Qin'an was a bit uncomfortable, but he didn't say anything. He picked up the basket with one hand and carried it behind him, so he couldn't leave. Suyen glanced at his back and saw that the man looked taller than her in the yard, at least 1.85 meters or more. The shoulders are particularly wide, slightly burly, but not exaggerated. After going back and forth 4 times, Suyen finally finished pulling the vegetables. She didn't even let go of the onion sprouts and stood up to wipe her sweat. "All right, it's done," she said after speaking. "I saw mud on Qin'an's face, probably accidentally causing it while carrying vegetables." She pointed and said, "Brother Qin, you have mud on your face." Qin'an raised his hand and casually wiped it twice, but it didn't clean up. Suyen walked over, she pointed to the dirty spot and said, "It's right here." She suddenly approached, Qin'an took a few steps back to avoid suspicion, turned around, and walked away. "Go back and wash." Suyen realized something later and casually touched the tip of her nose. It was the first time she had seen a man, afraid of taking advantage. "No wonder I'm so old and not in a hurry to marry a wife." As soon as she got home, she saw 2 live rabbits in the yard. She looked towards Qin'an, and the mountain rabbits were cunning and difficult to catch. He still had some skills. "These rabbits are really fat." What came to her mind, she said again, "Can you take me to town tomorrow? See if there is any way to make money. If you can support yourself once, you can support yourself again. It is impossible to seek death." Qin'an thought for a moment, and Suyen didn't say anything. She went to the kitchen and mixed a large pot of water, then started washing vegetables. Seeing the woman's nimble hands and feet working, Qin'an instinctively glanced at her again and quickly returned to the room. When he came out again, he took a grass mat and placed it in Suyen's room. "Afterwards, I sat in the yard playing with chili roots, but there wasn't much chili, and it was done in about 15 minutes. Suyen has already cooked all the dishes she has washed here, so she can take them out and hang them for drying. This way, when she eats them in the future, she can take them out and cook them." The yard was gradually filled with vegetables, and the cold grass house suddenly had a hint of living. Qin'an glanced a few times and couldn't help but look at the busy woman in the kitchen. She seemed really different. Afterwards, he thought of something and found a few wooden boards to fix the door of Suyen's room. Before, living alone, these things were just a matter of compromise, and in a few days, they would be ruined by those people. He is too lazy to fix these. It was almost dusk after finishing everything, and it was unknown whose dog kept barking outside, which scared the rabbits in the yard to run around. Finally, Qin'an used a backpack to encircle them. Suyen came out of the kitchen, wiped the sweat off her forehead with her hand, and let out a breath. Finally, "It's done," she said. She probably got water on the dirt steps, and suddenly stumbled and leaned back. Her face changed and she wanted to grab something but didn't catch it. However, a powerful thug pulled her arm, and as soon as she stood firm, he immediately let go and said stiffly, "Don't stand here." Then I went to the kitchen and shoveled some ash onto the table, and the ground immediately dried up. Old rules, everyday writing, end of this chapter. Chapter 5. In his 20s, he still doesn't have a wife. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. In his 20s, he still doesn't have a wife. Thank you, Brother Qin. Suyen noticed that the people in Qin'an were really pretty good, but they didn't say much. However, it's also true that rough men who do farm work are generally more bored. Speaking of which, it's quite pitiful. I haven't had a father or mother since I was young, and no one has taught me anything. I'm in my 20s and haven't mentioned my wife yet. The man here got married at the age of 15, and at his age, children can run around the village. Qin'an turned around and went into the room. After a while, he took out a small bag of rice and handed it to Suyen, then said, "Boil this." If it weren't for Suyen, he wouldn't have eaten at night. Seeing Miss Suyen's eyes brighten up, she was already hungry and just eating vegetables was not enough. She took him over and looked at him, saying, "If I sell the land tomorrow, there must be a lot. I'll buy some rice back then." She paused for a moment and once again expressed her gratitude to him. "Thank you, Brother Qin, for taking me in." "No need." Qin'an pursed his lips and didn't ask her to buy it. "I have the money for buying rice. You can keep it for yourself, don't take it out for use. Keep it for self-defense." After speaking, he was stunned for a moment. He never talks too much about others. By saying these words to him, Su Yan knew that the man in front of her was not bad. Her tone became more sincere. "Qin, don't be polite to me. If you have money, we can use it together. I am very grateful if you can take me in. I went to cook, but there's no water in the tank. Can you go pick 2 buckets? Qin'an let out a and took the bucket before leaving. There were quite a few people by the river, and many people saw him with disdainful eyes. Being with a widow, what could it be? "Some people are not afraid of getting dirty diseases, they really dare to do anything," said a woman as she changed into a yin-yang monster while washing clothes. "That's right, I haven't touched a woman since I was in my 20s, no wonder I'm not picky. It's just a pile of garbage." Qin'an's hand paused for a moment, staring at her with a faint gaze. The woman was still a bit scared for a moment, and suddenly didn't say anything. After Qin'an picked up the water and left, a group of women were full of gossip and could say anything unpleasant. Before reaching the doorstep, Qin'an saw the curls of cooking smoke. He paused for a moment, probably not seeing any cooking smoke at home for a long time. Only when parents are still around. It's been over a decade. Entering the yard, he heard the sound of chopping vegetables in the kitchen. He turned his head and looked over. The woman lowered her head slightly, her hair curled up at the back, with a few scattered strands. She moves quickly, her expression is not sad, and she doesn't seem to have any complaints. At this moment, a voice rang out from the kitchen, and the woman's voice was like a yellow warbler. "Qin, what's wrong?" In line with her gaze, Qin'an lowered his head and said stiffly, "It's nothing." After saying that, he picked up the water and poured it in. As he poured in, the veins on his arms slightly appeared. If you look closely, you can see the redness on his ear tips. It's not that he has a shy personality, it's just that he doesn't have much contact with women on weekdays. Su Yan didn't notice and glanced at his arm. No wonder those who wanted to pay the bill were afraid of him. No one felt uncomfortable getting punched in this figure. Sure enough, it's better to be a little stronger. Safety. Afterwards, Qin'an sat at the stove door and set fire to the fire. Under the light of the fire, the man's appearance was somewhat dull and unclear, and the dry skin on his face could not be seen. He is actually very handsome. Su Yan couldn't help but take a few more glances. If it were modern, she wouldn't be pursued as her boyfriend. Unfortunately, she doesn't like men. Of course, she doesn't like women either. But I was born in the wrong place. In this village, appearance doesn't matter. The man is fine, but if she were a woman, it would probably be a disaster. Just like a glance at the original person, who is clearly innocent but has not escaped being bullied by others. But now it's her. If anyone bullies her, she will make it difficult for those people. Suddenly, there was a knocking sound at the door. Qin'an stood up and put down the tongs. Someone was causing trouble, and he frowned, thinking that someone who wanted money had come to find trouble again. "It's in the kitchen, don't come out." After saying that, he walked out and pulled the kitchen door over. Su Yan looked outside through the crack in the door and saw the village chief coming, so she went out. The village chief had several marks on his face, indicating that he had been caught by his wife. He looked at Su Yan with an unpleasant expression and said reluctantly, "Let's have someone build the yard tomorrow. Ultimately, I am still afraid of suing officials." With this, Su Yan had a sense of confidence. It seemed that she was still afraid of officials. After thinking for a moment, she disagreed and said, "Just building a yard is not enough. You still need to compensate me half a tael of silver, and then help me sell the land. I will take it early tomorrow morning. If it's not possible, we'll meet with the government. You'll have to face punishment for killing, and your village chief won't be able to do it. It's much faster for the village chief to help sell the land. Upon hearing these words, the village chief's face twisted, but as he looked at Qin'an beside him, he gritted his teeth and gave her a glance, making her feel embarrassed and saying, "Your land is not yours. I got married and it's mine. What's wrong? Do you want my husband to get up from the coffin and press a fingerprint?" Su Yan glanced at Qin'an and retorted, pretending to be a tiger. The village chief choked and gave her a fierce glare. "I won't pay for the silver, but I'll sell the land for you. Don't take any advantage of it, you'll have to live in the village from now on. Life. Do you still have to provide us with food and clothing? All the things I said must be taken, if not, the government will see you. Don't go too far, you slut." The village chief's wife ran over and cursed, looking like she was going to eat people. "I don't know who went too far," Su Yan rolled her eyes and said, "Now I've changed my mind. Give me 1 or 2 silver, don't say anything less. You murderers, I don't know if you're going to sleep tonight, whether you're stepping on it or not." Some women around the murderer panicked and said, "Who killed someone? Don't talk nonsense." The less they want to listen, the more Su Yan wants to say, "And these people are already murderers, 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 murderers." Suddenly, a woman became angry and wanted to hit her. Qin'an stood at the door and said in a low voice, "If anyone comes in, don't blame me for taking action." He was tall and had a somewhat ominous expression when he was expressionless, and the village was afraid of him. Suddenly, those people only dared to stand at the door. Su Yan stood behind Qin'an and tilted her head, saying, "If you don't give me, I'll go to the yamen tomorrow." There is a kind of fox pretending to be tiger-like. The village chief was afraid of losing the official, so he raised his hand and slapped his mother. In law, "Shut up, it's all your fault. You're happy to see me enter the yamen. You women don't work all day, you're just doing nothing. Which ones participated? Let's share it equally with her. If we don't, let's go to the yamen with her." With these words, the scene became lively, and several families began to curse, not wanting to give, but also not wanting to go to the yamen. Finally, he pooled 1 or 2 silver coins on the spot to give to Su Yan. The village chief's face turned very black, and he asked who family wanted the land of Mrs. Su's house on the spot. "Mrs. Su's land is good and very good for growing crops. There is no good land available for sale in the village, and a few have made a statement to buy it. Normally, good land costs 10 taels of silver, but it cannot be sold so much. At most, the one who offered it was 9 taels. Thank you very much for your support, Bishin." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Rest assured that you won't seduce him. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Rest assured that you won't seduce him. Su Yan agreed to sell it to him, took out the land deed from her socks, paid silver in one hand, and the land deed in the other. With 10 taels of silver in hand, Su Yan felt a little confident in her heart, not to be empty-handed in this ghostly place. After these people left, Qin'an closed the gate of the courtyard. Su Yan gave 7 taels of silver to Qin'an and explained under his gaze, "Brother Qin, the extra 1 or 2 taels of silver count as the money I borrowed from your house. 6 taels of silver are what I borrowed from you. The 2 of them have no relatives or connections, so it is more reliable to have a silver transaction, at least in terms of the relationship between the tenant and the owner. I probably haven't seen such a foolish person before. Just give him 1 or 2 silver, but fortunately Qin'an is not a bad person. He only needed 6 taels of silver and said, 'No need, I have money to eat. I'll go to town tomorrow and write a loan agreement for you.' 'No need, I believe Brother Qin.'" Su Yan's eyebrows curved and her eyes didn't look like she was lying. Suddenly smelling a sticky smell, she let out an "ah" and said, "My meal, it's done, it's done, it's done." She hurriedly ran into the kitchen. Looking at her figure, Qin'an suddenly had a smile on his lips and quickly restrained himself, following her into the kitchen. Suyen stirred the rice in the pot with a spatula. There was a slight pot residue on the rice, but it didn't affect the taste. Fortunately, it wasn't too burnt. It's almost ready, she said and scooped it into a clay bowl. Afterwards, I stir-fried the vegetables with water, added salt and chili peppers, and the taste of chili peppers came out, much more delicious than what I had at noon. Presumably, men and women were on guard. Qin'an scooped up rice, picked up some vegetables, and then went to sit at the doorstep of the yard. The sturdy figure looked at the lonely and pitiful monster. Living for so long, being alone all along, is quite lonely. Suyen understood the unpleasant feeling. In her past life, when she went out to work and had no one to talk to, she kept everything in her mind and sometimes felt almost depressed. After thinking for a moment, she took the vegetables and went out, a little further away from him. She placed the vegetables in the middle and said, "Brother Qin, the moon is really round today." Qin'an stood up somewhat uncomfortable and sat far away, afraid that the two of them might have any improper relationship. Suyen. If it weren't for fear of awkwardness, she would really want to say, "Don't worry, I won't seduce you. Forget it, let's eat instead." Probably full, she couldn't help but hiccup. Qin'an glanced at her and then picked up the dishes to wash. When she was washing her face and feet, Qin'an entered the room. He didn't come out until she entered. The heart of guarding against others was indispensable, but Suyen was still a bit afraid that Qin'an would start thinking when he saw money. She locked the lock from inside and then lifted the dusty cylinder inside the room to the door. But if Qin'an really wants to do something, even 10 large cylinders cannot stop him. Suyen occasionally paid attention to the outside, but there was no other sound except for the sound of frogs, and gradually she fell asleep. When she woke up again, she was startled by a knock on the door and warned, "Who?" Qin'an's voice came from outside the door, and a deep voice said, "Qin'an, it's time to go to town." Suyen sighed with relief and hurriedly replied, "Wait for me right now." She got up after saying that. Without a wooden comb, she grabbed it and tied it into a fried dough twists braid. At this moment of dawn, she saw the wooden comb at the door as soon as she went out, and there was no one else except Qin'an. She was treated well by others, and Suyen felt a bit embarrassed to think of him so much last night. "Because I have to rush to town, I can't have breakfast anymore." Actually, there's no breakfast either. Countryside people will go out to work early in the morning and enjoy the lunch together. After tying the rabbit's feet, Qin'an threw it into the basket and then took out various types of hay from the house. Suyen glanced at her curiously and asked, "Is it a medicinal herb?" Qin'an let out a and his gaze swept over her face, probably just waking up with a slight blush on his cheeks. Realizing what he was looking at, he immediately moved away unnaturally. Suyen had no idea at all. She bent down to take a few glances and thought to herself that if she had time, she would also look for herbs. It would be good if she could exchange some silver money then. Lock the door, and the two of them headed towards the boat. Qin'an made a bamboo raft himself and left it there. After loosening the rope, he gestured for Suyen to go up first. Shaking and unsteady, Suyen didn't get up for a while. Qin'an pursed her lips before reaching out to grab her arm and let her sit on it. Suyen sat down firmly before thanking Qin'an, "Thank you, Brother Qin." Qin'an didn't go to see her, just his hand holding the bamboo pole tightened slightly. The women next door, who were waiting for everyone to set sail, all showed signs of disgust. "It's really disgusting in broad daylight," they said. "That's not true. I'm afraid even the coffin boards of the Li family won't be able to hold down." Suyen rolled her eyes and couldn't help but say, "I can't hold it down anymore. I'll jump out and settle accounts with you." As Qin'an rode away, she suddenly splashed water over there with a sound, like a duck's throat. Suyen rolled her eyes at them and turned her head to meet Qin'an's gaze. She restrained herself a bit. After all, it was her delicate appearance that made Qin'an take her in. "We can't let them bully us for nothing," she explained in a casual manner. Qin'an let out a and watched as he started paddling ahead. In about 15 minutes, he was on the opposite side. After getting off the oars, the two of them walked towards the town. After walking for half an hour, Su Yan's legs were a bit weak. Qin'an noticed it and deliberately slowed down. There were already many people in the town, and for a while, various fragrances mixed together. Su Yan couldn't help but swallow her saliva as she looked at the steamed buns. Qin'an noticed her gaze, stopped and walked over, saying, "I want a meat bun." "Hole, 2 copper coins." Uncle quickly wrapped the bun and handed it to him. Qin'an counted 2 for him and then gave it to Su Yan without saying anything. Su Yan hesitated for a moment, feeling a little warm in her heart. Then she divided the bun into 2 halves and handed him half. "Qin, here," she said, "I'm not hungry." Qin'an didn't pick up and walked forward with a backpack on his back. His pace was not fast, clearly waiting for her. Su Yan left half and ate the other half, and the two of them searched for more than half before finding a stall. As soon as they saw wild rabbits selling, many people gathered around. Qin'an probably didn't know how to greet them, and he didn't speak without asking anyone. Su Yan swallowed the bun and helped greet it, saying, "Uncle, Auntie, this rabbit is alive. It's fresh, to take it back and kill it. How much 1 per kilogram?" As the uncle spoke, his gaze fell on Su Yan's bulging chest. Su Yan hadn't noticed yet, but Qin'an did. He walked over to block Su Yan and said in a cold voice, 12 no bargaining." Uncle lost his head and then his gaze fell on the rabbit. He licked his tongue and said, "This is too expensive. Forget it, I won't buy it." "Uncle, it's not expensive. It's great to buy it back and drink." Su Yan felt that Qin'an really didn't know how to do business, so she leaned out from beside Qin'an and greeted him. Qin'an frowned, and the uncle hesitated for a moment before turning around and coming back. "Then weigh 1, don't lose weight, or I'll come back to find you later." As he spoke, he looked at her face. "Don't worry, it won't happen." Su Yan touched Qin'an and gestured for him to weigh the rabbit. Qin'an glanced at her and then grabbed one with his back hand, weighing it. 5 pounds and 2 taels, 60.21, he said. Uncle gave money and carried the rabbit away, while others found it expensive and took a glance before leaving. After Qin'an placed the copper coins, he turned his head to look at Su Yan, frowned, and said low, "Don't talk, just stand behind." He had no expression and looked as if he was angry. Thank you for liking it. End of this chapter. Don't worry, Chapter 7. I don't want to be your wife. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Don't worry, Chapter 7. I don't want to be your wife. Su Yan thought he was angry. After all, women in this place don't have the authority to make decisions. She quickly explained, I didn't mean to interrupt, I wanted to help sell it together. No, it's not. Qin'an bent down and tied the back of the basket, then said, they're not looking at rabbits, they're looking at you. Upon hearing this, Su Yan understood his meaning and couldn't help but laugh and cry, saying, they just want to see. I can't live a life without seeing anyone, can I? Who else can a widow rely on besides herself? If we don't leave the main gate, we'll die inside for 7 days. However, gossip is really unpleasant, especially for women in this dynasty. When she said this, Qin'an fell silent for a moment and didn't say anything, but when someone looked at her with ill intentions, he would still block her. At first, Su Yan didn't notice it, but later she did, feeling a bit warm in her heart. She will repay any kindness she has, and when she solves her own problem, she will help him if she can. As noon approached, the prey was sold out, and then the two went to the herb shop to sell herbs for more than 10 won. The doctor knew that Qin'an was hunting and gave him a blueprint. When you go up the mountain, help me pay attention to this herb. 1 or 2 silver plants are difficult to find, and they may only be found near the deep mountain cliffs. Okay. Qin'an brought it over and put it in his sleeve. The doctor glanced at Su Yan and asked with a smile, "Married a wife?" "It's so beautiful." Qin'an looked at the woman standing upright next to him, shook his head, and explained, "It's my sister." The doctor was a bit surprised and said, "You still have a girl. Did you propose a marriage yet?" "My son hasn't proposed a marriage yet. Generally, women can curl their hair. Su Yan combs fried dough twists braids, but it's hard to see whether she is married or not. I said, we'll leave first if we have something else to do." Qin'an gestured for Su Yan to go out. After the two of them walked away, Qin'an suddenly explained, "The son of the doctor doesn't work all year round." At first, Su Yan didn't realize the meaning of what he was saying, but after a while, she realized that he was explaining. "Thank you, Brother Qin. I won't remarry either. Just live a good life. Where can I sell spices? Buy some to stir fry and weigh some lard." "The one at the corner in front." Qin'an watched the woman walking ahead, looking at her with some exploration. This person seems really different. As soon as Su Yan arrived at the shop, the owner greeted her warmly and said, "Widow Li, what do you want to buy?" This is the only grocery store in town, and her original owner usually buys salt here. Naturally, the owner knows her. Before Su Yan could say anything, a figure rushed in and said, "You go outside and I'll take care of you. Hurry up." As she spoke, she began to chase him away. The owner reluctantly went out, but he didn't dare to confront the mother tiger. "You mother.in.law." Although the wife of the owner doesn't like Su Yan, she also knows that she wants to do business. "What should I buy?" Su Yan didn't care about her reaction either. "If you want Sichuan pepper, chili powder, 5 taels each, and half a pound of salt, can you make it cheaper?" Looking at how much she bought, the owner's wife was also quite cheerful. Sichuan pepper and chili powder are 6 won and 1 liang, and salt is 50 won and 1 pound, a total of 85 won. "You can give it 81, she said. Su Yan nodded and said, "Can you help me weigh it?" Then she took out half a tael of silver. The wife of the host family glanced at her and felt that she was quite agile this time. She used to be timid for a long time, afraid that she would weigh her name and speak softly. "I'll give you a handful of scallions as a gift, considering how much you've bought." "Thank you." Su Yan saw someone selling soybeans at the door and pointed to them, asking, "How much does this cost per kilogram?" The wife of the host family glanced and said, "That's cheap. If you want it, 3 won and 2 jin. Is 5 won and 4 jin okay? This bean should be from 2 years ago." Su Yan bent down and grabbed it, looking a bit gray. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a cheap price. This year's beans are 4 won and 1 jin, and 5 won and 4 jin are 4 jin. To be honest with you, ground tofu is not very delicious and cannot be used as a seed. If you buy it, it won't be refunded, said the daughter.in.law of the host family. Su Yan was planning to use it to make bean sprouts. Now that there is no land to grow vegetables, she can still eat bean sprouts for a while. "I know, it's worth 10 won, she said. After speaking, she looked at Qin'an, who came in and said, "What else can I buy?" Qin'an pointed at the rice and said, "You need 5 pounds of coarse rice and 5 pounds of fine rice. How much silver does it cost in total?" Upon hearing his words, his wife glanced at the two of them with a clear expression of gossip. Coarse rice weighs 8 won per kilogram, and fine rice weighs 12 won per kilogram, totaling 100 won. With these, the total is 191. "I'll give you another handful of scallions." Su Yan quickly handed her the silver and said, "Take it from me." Before his wife could say anything, Qin'an counted 191 and placed it on the counter. Then he put it in the basket and put the weighed items in it. Su Yan had no choice but to withdraw the silver money, thinking that she would give it to him later. After everything was put away, Qin'an picked it up with one hand and carried it behind her back. The daughter-in-law of the host family praised, "My younger brother is still very strong. After finishing, I will come back to buy next time." "I'll carry the beans," Su Yan thought, thinking it would be a bit difficult to carry them on her back. "No need," Qin'an said and went out with a backpack on his back. Su Yan quickly followed behind and the two went to the pork stall to buy pork edge oil and boil it. When Qin'an was picking, Su Yan accidentally saw the patched shoes on his feet, probably he had patched them himself, and the stitches were a bit crooked. She glanced around and landed on the cloth shop diagonally opposite. "Qin, I'm going to buy something." "Wait for me," she said during the conversation. I looked at his shoes again and estimated the approximate size. Qin'an looked at her as she went to the opposite cloth shop and withdrew his gaze, saying to the butcher, "I want another pound of lean meat." After a while, Su Yan came over with a cloth bag. Qin'an gestured for her to put it in the basket, and she put it inside. After buying everything, the two of them rushed to the village. After walking for most of the way, Su Yan was panting uncontrollably, while Qin'an was not panting at all. Sure enough, being strong is good. Qin'an noticed that she was tired and said in a low voice, "Let's take a break under the tree ahead." Su Yan shook her head. "It's already getting late now, and it's already dark after dragging around. It won't be easy to cross the river then. In addition, Qin'an hasn't had a meal for a whole day." Qin'an didn't say anything and stopped walking under the tree. Su Yan had to sit on the ground to catch her breath, and in the afterglow, she caught a glimpse of his shoes opening. She stood up, reached out for the cloth bag, and took out the black boots inside to give him. "Brother Qin, wear this," she said. "I estimated the size and bought it, it should be suitable." Looking at the shoes, Qin'an instinctively froze for a moment, then realized that he pursed his lips and said, "No need. Don't worry, I don't want to be your daughter-in-law, I just appreciate you taking me in." Su Yan forcefully handed it to him and said, "If you still want to disturb Brother Qin for a while, you can accept it, otherwise I won't be able to stay. Thank you for liking it." End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Qin'an Special Soft Food. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Qin'an Special Soft Food. After a moment of stalemate, Qin'an finally accepted it, put down his backpack, and went behind the tree to change his shoes. After all, Su Yan is a woman, and if someone sees her, they will gossip about her. Su Yan sat back on the grass to take a breath and looked at the bright sky not far away. Fortunately, it was close to the river. If there was no water source, it might be drought. After a while, Qin'an came over wearing new shoes. Su Yan glanced at her and said, "Is it suitable?" Qin'an nodded, then wrapped his old shoes in a cloth bag and placed them around his waist. After a while, the two of them continued on their journey, sitting on the bamboo raft and returning home almost at dusk. After resting for a while, Su Yan took the beans and went to the kitchen, grabbing a few handful and soaking them. Qin'an was not idle either. He washed the pot and boiled pork. In no time, there was a smell of lard in the kitchen. At this moment, Su Yan sat panning rice, half coarse and half fine, and looked at the boiling lard in the pot. "This lard is fragrant when cooked," she said. "Boil the pig oil residue for a longer time, it can be stored for a longer time. When I come back to town next time, I'll buy some flour to make dumplings, which will definitely be very fragrant." Listening to the woman muttering incessantly, Qin'an Yuguang glanced at her, probably sunbathing for a whole day, and her cheeks turned slightly red. He let out a low and then went out with a full bucket of waste water. After a while, he came back with an empty bucket and said, "That yard is made of rotten wood, so I don't think we can stay for long." Su Yan knew that he was referring to the courtyard built for her by the village. These people would not be afraid to report to the government if they built it. If she forced them to build a good courtyard, 80% of the village head would have to find a way to clean up her. In addition, the village chief was able to compromise, partly because Qin'an was not easy to deal with. In the future, she will have to live alone when she moves out, so she cannot offend too harshly for the time being. Stay temporarily if possible. I saved up silver money later and had someone come to fix it properly. Seeing the woman not speaking, Qin'an's hand holding a spatula paused for a moment. He pursed his lips and after a while said, I'm going up the mountain to hunt. I can bring some wood down and help you build a house, but time will be much slower. He doesn't really like to help, and no one in the village helps him. He is accustomed to being alone. Suyen's eyes lit up and she looked up at him. Thank you, Brother Qin. I will calculate your wages. As much silver as others pay per day, that's all. It doesn't matter if it takes a long time, it can reduce a lot of trouble at once. No need, you told them not to build anymore. Qin'an said nothing after finishing. Suyen wiped her hands and got up, then went out. It was indeed a pile of rotten wood. It had only been a day, and she was almost halfway there. If there were strong winds, she might collapse. She was a bit angry. The widow had already found it difficult to live, and these people didn't show any mercy, but instead made things difficult for her. But she knew that being angry was useless, and no one would take her seriously unless there was money. You don't need to build anymore, we'll just dismantle the wood and leave it here. She also wants rotten wood, no matter how hard she chops it, it can be used as firewood. The man closest to her glanced at her and said obscene things. Widowly, this is not in bed. Just stop talking and stop. Suddenly, everyone else laughed, and Suyen was too lazy to say anything to them. If you don't do what I said, then I will report to the government tomorrow and let the officials see if this courtyard can accommodate people. She paused for a moment and then said, go to the doctor's place to buy some medicine for treatment. Your lower body has grown, so you can talk about it. She rolled her eyes and left. Everyone. Most women cannot speak such vulgar language, and if they hear it, they should probably be ashamed to cry. Widowly actually fought back. There's no need to build a house anymore, of course others are willing, and it won't be long before it's demolished. On this side, Suyen put on her waistband and started cooking, while Qin'an washed cans of oil next to her. Neither of them said anything. With spices, the taste of the dishes will be much better. Suyen stir-fried a bowl of green pepper and pork slices, and then stir-fried a green vegetable. The rice in another pot is also cooked. Suyen handed the chopsticks to Qin'an and said, how does it taste? Qin'an looked at the 2 bowls of rice and 2 dishes on the table, and for a moment, the dilapidated hall was filled with fireworks. As usual, this place was cold and deserted. No wonder everyone wants to marry a wife. He took it over and tasted the chopsticks. The taste was really good. He nodded and said, it's delicious. Suyen smiled and sat across from him. If it's delicious, eat more. I can cook a lot of dishes for Brother Qin to taste in the future. Qin'an took a glance and quickly withdrew his gaze. He picked up the vegetables and went to sit on the doorstep. Knowing that he was uncomfortable, Suyen didn't go over either. She was so hungry that her chest pressed against her back. She ate a steamed bun in a day, which was unbearable for anyone. The summer rain came inexplicably, and just after eating, it started to rain heavily with a crackling sound. This kind of bean rain usually doesn't last long. Fortunately, I collected the dried vegetables when I came back. After about a quarter of an hour, the rain stopped and the ground in the yard had turned into muddy ground, so I didn't dare to rest. When Qin'an was washing dishes, Suyen was cleaning the main room. The rain and wind were still a bit cold, and she trembled. She looked down at the clothes on her body and forgot to buy a change of clothes. I've sweated so much today, I'm sure I need to change. I can only wash my clothes tonight and wear them tomorrow morning. After sweeping the floor clean, she went to the kitchen and said, Qin, you can wash it first today. Qin'an glanced at her and finally landed on her clothes. After washing the dishes, he returned to the room. After a while, he gave her 2 sets of clothes and said, "My mother." He paused for a moment and said, "If you're afraid, don't wear it." Suyen didn't mind if it was his mother who had to change clothes, and she didn't die wearing this outfit. She thanked him and said, "Thank you, brother Qin." Seeing that she didn't mind, Qin'an didn't say anything. It is estimated that Qin'an's mother was not fat when she was alive. She wore clothes that were a bit tight, but she could still wear them, except that her chest was a bit tight. I have to say that I didn't eat well in my original body, but these places actually grow well. She didn't reach the door this night and walked a long way. She definitely couldn't bear it and lay down for a while before falling asleep. It's not even dawn yet, and I don't know whose chicken it is, barking as if it's been killed. Suyen was naturally awakened, yawned and went out. Qin'an had already left, and the door latch had been opened. She wanted to push the door open for a breath of air, but it was locked outside. She was probably worried that the door wouldn't close. Although Qin'an is a rough man, his heart is actually quite delicate, and he particularly eats soft food. I guess just like her, if someone treats her well, they will definitely repay her. She turned around and went to the kitchen. There were still some leftovers from yesterday's meal, and she picked up the yellowed vegetables in the basket, probably not left until noon. She washed everything clean, cut it into small pieces, and then placed it next to her. She will stir-fry it when Qin'an comes back. Afterwards, I wiped the inside and outside of the handkerchief clean, and a lot of dust accumulated in many places. In 1 or 2 quarters of an hour, it was dawn outside, and the sun climbed halfway up the mountain. At that moment, the sound of unlocking came from outside. Qin'an came back carrying 2 pieces of wood and placed them on the edge of the yard. Seeing Suyen getting up, he wiped his sweat and explained, "I locked the door when I saw you didn't wake up." Thank you for liking it. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Rough Men Eat Roughly. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Rough men eat roughly. Seeing him chop down the wood to make the house early in the morning, Suyen felt a little more grateful in her heart. Whether it was because she helped him or not, it was already very good to be able to help her in this way. To put it bluntly, if other men in the village knew that she had money and was a widow, the first day she was taken in would be a waste. I know. She turned around and went to the kitchen to fetch water, placed it in front of him, and said, "Wash it up, I'll go stir-fry the rice, it'll be ready in a while." After that, she hurriedly went to the kitchen. Qin'an still didn't get used to having more women at home. He stared at her back for a while before taking back his gaze and bending down to wash his hands. Then I entered the main hall. The previously dusty walls were clean and tidy, and the rudimentary main hall seemed to be less rudimentary. He paused for a moment and turned his head to look at the ground where he came in, stepping on a row of mud marks. He pursed his lips and quickly turned around to exit, then washed the soles of his shoes clean at the door. The aroma of the kitchen food came out, and he couldn't help but look towards the kitchen. The woman skillfully waved the spatula. The Li family has married a good wife, but their fate is too thin and they lack luck. Afterwards, he went to get a broom and swept the hall once. Suyen quickly cooked the rice, brought out 2 bowls of rice, and placed them on the table. "Qin, come over and have dinner," she said. "I put some deep frying inside, but I don't know if it's salty or not." Qin'an stood up and took a bite. Suyen was about to say it was hot, but he swallowed it and said, "It's not salty, just right." This rough guy eats rough food, so Suyen held it for a while and couldn't help but laugh. "That's good." Qin'an didn't know what she was laughing at, but he didn't ask anything. He went to the doorstep and sat with his legs crossed. The man ate quickly and finished a bowl of rice in no time. Suyen had only eaten a small portion of the rice, and when she saw him holding a bow and arrow, she knew she was going up the mountain. "Qin, can you take me up the mountain with you? I won't disturb you hunting. I'll go up the mountain and find some wild vegetables and mushrooms. Qin'an scanned half of the bowl of rice that she had not finished yet, pursed her lips, and said, "Here we go." After that, he put down his bow and arrow, went to the kitchen for a spin, and quickly took the bucket out. Afraid of causing trouble, Su Yan ate faster and had a dry meal, almost choking. She took several sips of water before swallowing it and washed the dishes before he came back. When Qin'an returned, she had already packed up and carried a basket that had been useless for a long time. She wiped it clean for a while before finally wiping it clean. Qin'an didn't say anything when he saw it. He took a bow and arrow and a backpack and went out first. When Su Yan came out, he locked the door. The two of them walked in front of each other without speaking. There were many people working in the morning, and after a few glances, they went to work. "It's cool in the morning and can't be delayed, otherwise I'll have to work under the bright sun in the afternoon." At the beginning, the road up the mountain was still in a stepped shape, not very difficult to walk. After entering the mountain forest for a period of time, weeds were overgrown, and the grass that cut people grew taller than humans, mixed with one or two small thorny grasses. Su Yan reached out and pushed once, but after being stabbed, she didn't dare to push and had to cover her hands and walk forward. It may have been a while since Qin'an heard anything behind him. He turned his head and saw that the woman was almost submerged in the grass. He strode over and then widened the grass on both sides with a few feet, then walked ahead without saying a word. The man was so strong that he couldn't even get up from stepping on the wild grass. Su Yan finally looked up and walked, quickly catching up with Qin'an in front of her. "Thank you, Brother Qin." After a while, Qin'an stopped and pointed to the left, saying, "There are many mushrooms and wild vegetables over there. I still have some way to go. Once you pick it up, go down the mountain." After saying that, he took out the key and gave it to him. Su Yan nodded and took it over, saying, "Okay, be careful." When Qin'an disappeared into the forest, she took a branch and searched for mushrooms on the ground. Yesterday, it rained and many small mushrooms emerged. She didn't expect to wait a few more days to search again. When the time comes, let alone the mushroom residue will be invisible. She picked a basket of edible mushrooms and found a lot of land on the moss on a stone. The land is still a bit sparse, it's not easy to pick up. She remembered her location and finally picked up the land. She spent most of an hour searching nearby and picked up half a basket of mushrooms. She returned to the land and after being exposed to the sun for a long time, she could now pick it up. When picking up, just pick up the grass residue on top and go back to Tao to stir fry. It was already noon after picking it up, and she didn't wait for Qin'an to come. She went down the mountain with a basket in hand, and didn't know whose dog came running over to roar at her, startling her. Fortunately, the stick in his hand was not lost, and he waved it a few times before running away. When she got home, she was already sweating hot. After resting for a while, she warmed up a large pot of water, took a bucket to the house to wipe her sweat, changed into clean clothes, and then cooked rice. Afterwards, I washed the ground in the yard. The ground was delicious, but difficult to wash. If I couldn't clean it thoroughly, there would be moss mixed in. I washed it 4 or 5 times before it became clean. If you don't eat mushrooms at noon, they won't be washed. You can wash them when you eat them at night. Yesterday, half of the lean meat was left, and she planned to cut it all up and stir-fry it. If left in this weather for too long, it will spoil. She didn't wait for Qin'an to come back before stir-frying. It's estimated that he won't be able to come back temporarily because the weather will be good and there will be more prey. After stir-frying, she ate herself full and scooped up rice to serve to Qin'an. Half an hour later, she arrived at the location where Qin'an had parted ways. She walked towards the footprints in front and occasionally called out, "Brother Qin." After walking for about a quarter of an hour, she saw Qin'an walking over from a distance, his figure growing taller and stronger against the backdrop of the forest. She quickly reached out and called out, "Brother Qin." After all these years of hunting in Qin'an, it was the first time someone had called him in the mountains and forests, and he was instantly stunned. Su Yan walked over and only then did he realize, "Why did you come up here? There's a snake inside. Years of hunting and wild boars are basically not here anymore. I've been watching for so long without coming back, so I'll bring you some food." Su Yan lifted the cloth from the basket, handed him the bowls and chopsticks, then looked at his backpack and said, "Didn't you hit it?" Looking at the meat slices on the rice, it was obvious that there were quite a few. Qin'an pursed his lips and said, "You don't need to bring them up in the future. I will come back to eat them. I hit a wild chicken." He put down the basket for her to see, then sat next to him with a bowl and started eating. Su Yan waited beside her to bring the bowl back and bent down to look at the dead pheasant in the basket. The pheasant feathers were quite beautiful. "I picked up a big basket of mushrooms. If you take them to town and sell them together with wild chickens, there will definitely be more people buying them. Mushrooms are cheaper to sell, or wild chickens are 2 or 3 cents more expensive, so mushrooms don't count as money. Wild chicken stewed with mushrooms is definitely delicious." Qin'an glanced at her and let out a before speaking up after eating. "Thank you for liking it." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Having someone to support is different. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Having someone to support is different. It's much cooler in the mountains than at the foot. After sitting for a while, Su Yan stopped getting hot. Qin'an, as usual, ate quickly and finished a few bites. Su Yan remembered something and quickly took out a bamboo tube of water from the basket. "Here you are," she said. Qin'an glanced and took a few sips. This was his first time hunting, and someone had brought water and rice. His tone was softer than before. "You go down the mountain, I'll only come back tonight. Close the door." Su Yan nodded and packed the dishes into the basket. Just as she was about to leave, Qin'an took out the wild chicken from the basket and gave it to her. "Let's do it tonight," she said. Su Yan was stunned for a moment, and soon understood that he might have thought she wanted to eat. She shook her head and said, "Keep it for sale. Mingji stinks and can't sell any money," Qin'an said as he carried the basket on his back and gestured for her to hurry down the mountain. Just thinking about it, it was really too hot this day, so Su Yan didn't say anything. She picked it up and put it in a basket, then walked down the mountain. Qin'an stood in place for a while, watching her walk a long way before picking up the bamboo tube and continuing to search for prey nearby. There are quite a few prey coming out to search for food, but they are too cunning and a bit difficult to catch. The Qin family. As soon as Su Yan returned home, she rolled up her sleeves and boiled water to pluck the feathers of wild chickens. She left half for stewing and half for making cold diced chicken. The cold diced chicken should be preserved for a long time and will not spoil even in the future. When it's ready, she will take it to the town for sale. If you can't sell it for yourself, selling it is naturally the best. A few families near the Qin family could smell the fragrance from a long distance, and many children greedily ran to the Qin family's doorstep to visit. Some women also came over to take a look, but they didn't see anything. "What is the Qin family stir-frying? It's so fragrant," they whispered to each other. "I don't know, this is too fragrant." Su Yan came out to pour out the waste water, saw them, and as if she hadn't seen them, she poured out and closed the door. The women didn't see what it was and were a bit unhappy. "I'm afraid someone might eat the same thing, but it's not a good thing. My family cut the meat today, I'll go back and fry the crispy meat. Miss Jiang, the food is so good. It's still your family's men who make a name for themselves and cut meat every 3 to 5 days. Your family's men are the same. With so much money, if you go home and cook, my family will come back." After Su Yan steamed the rice in the room, she warmed it up in the pot, and then cleaned the yard. Except for Qin'an's room, everything else was cleaned up. Afterwards, when she saw Qin'an's pair of rotten shoes yesterday, she picked them up and took them to the riverbank to soak in water with her own clothes. Yesterday when I saw Qin'an washing clothes, I didn't use anything. When I go to town, I must buy some soap horns. It's usually during mealtime, and there aren't many people washing clothes. She's happy and clean, and the day after washing is almost dark. Just as he was about to get up, he met a strong man who came to fetch water. He looked at Su Yan and teased, "Widowly, how is Qin'an? Isn't he much better than your sickly husband?" Su Yan wouldn't pot, too lazy to glance at him, walked away directly. The strong man pursed his lips and muttered, "It's different to have someone to support him." Now Widowly has followed Qin'an, and the men in the village have become more peaceful. Qin'an is a solitary person, and anyone who provokes him will not be polite. Previously, Wang Ermatzi said a few words about his mother and almost got killed by Qin'an. If it weren't for the village chief letting someone pull him. Wang Ermatzi's grave has grown grass. Su Yan entered the door with her front foot, but she heard footsteps with her back foot. She thought it was the man chasing after her and quickly grabbed the shovel at the door. "Don't come over, I'll kill you." Before I could finish speaking, I saw clearly who the visitor was. Qin'an had returned. She breathed a sigh of relief and quickly put down the shovel to let him in. "I thought it was someone else," she said. Qin'an looked at the wooden basin in her hand, and said, "I'll go wash my clothes during the day." Then he closed the courtyard door. Su Yan saw the little wild boar in his basket and her eyes lit up. "How did you catch it?" "I'm alone." Qin'an didn't say much either. He released the wild boar and fed it some rotten vegetable leaves. Su Yan went to the kitchen and brought out a bucket of warm water. She walked a bit shaky and said, "Brother Qin, you can go wash it. I've been sweating all day." Qin'an thought it was because she felt that he smelled very bad. She pursed her lips and carried the wooden bucket back into the room. After closing the door, she lowered her head and smelled a foul smell of sweat. After a while, he came out holding his clothes. Su Yan saw him holding his clothes and quickly shouted, "Brother Qin, let it go. I'll wash it together tomorrow." "I've been tired all day, let's take a break," he said and walked over to pick up his clothes. Qin'an treats her fairly well, she can help whenever she can, it's just a small matter. Qin'an hesitated for a moment, his wheat-colored face somewhat unnatural. "No need, it's too smelly." "It's nothing, I'll go to town tomorrow and buy some soap horns to wash." Su Yan changed her hands and threw them into her basket, then went to bring out the food. Mushroom stewed chicken, and a green vegetable. She said again, "I only stewed half of it, and I made cold diced chicken for the other half. I'll take it to the town to sell tomorrow. By the way, I'll give you some to taste." After speaking, I got up and went to the kitchen to get it. Watching the woman bustling around, Qin'an couldn't help but take a second glance, as if there were not many people at home. Soon, Su Yan brought a small bowl over and said to the rough man, "It's a bit spicy. You can eat some first and see if you can eat it." Qin'an took some and put it in his mouth. After a few bites, he swallowed it and nodded, "It's delicious, a bit spicy." Seeing him swallow the bone together, Su Yan was stunned for a moment. She realized that she couldn't laugh or cry, but she didn't say anything. "If there's any more next time, I'll put less chili peppers and bring them up tomorrow. They'll sell for 31 per kilogram, which is 8 liang. By the way, Brother Qin, is there anything important in your room?" Qin'an took a bite of the rice and swallowed it. "No," he said, "then I'll help you clean it later." "It's not good to live with too much dust," Su Yan smiled. "I clean myself. You're a man, cleaning isn't that meticulous. Let me do it. I haven't done much work all day, so you just sit and rest." After Su Yan finished speaking, she didn't say anything. She lowered her head to pick up the vegetables and ate them. Qin'an didn't sit on the doorstep to eat today. After finishing, he rolled up his sleeves and went to wash the dishes. Su Yan took a broom and handkerchief to his room. It would be a bit dark. She went outside and brought a brazier to set the fire on, and suddenly the room lit up. The room was not messy, but it was also not clean. Clothes were casually left on the bench, and socks were stuffed into another pair of shoes. She took it out and glanced at 2 pairs, both of which were worn. She didn't mind it. Qin'an was busy hunting all day, so it was strange to have time to organize these things. She went outside and brought in the basket, threw in the clothes, and washed them all tomorrow. Qin'an originally thought the room was clean enough, but when he came in, he saw Su Yan sweeping a bunch of dirty things out, and his wheat-colored face couldn't help but turn red. He said unnaturally, "Let me come." Thank you for liking it. End of this chapter.